All right. So, Emil, I thought we would just jump right to the first show that you and I worked on together, which was in 2004, and was one of the exhibits that opened our museum at the mall in DC. And it's called Our Universes, Traditional Knowledge Shapes Our World. We've got a few pictures here of some of the mannequins in the exhibit. And I thought maybe you could tell us why we have such different looking mannequins in this particular show. We have, life cast mannequins and garments that are supported in a more abstract way.
Our Universes talks about our cosmology, our worldview. And in this exhibition, we included 8 Native communities from throughout the whole Western Hemisphere. So we went from Alaska to Canada, the United States, Central America, and then South America, working with Native communities. And it was really in working with these, what we call the co-curators. And it was their wish, but we did not want to have like really super realistic faces on these. There was one thing that they spoke of one time, seeing some of the old dioramas that they used to do like at Natural History. They did not want to see something like that was really kind of antiquated. And so they wanted something visually appealing, but also not to take away from the garments, from the traditional items. And so that's why you see these mannequins the way they are. And so this is the way that they expressed on how they should be displayed. And in consultation with them, we actually ran all of these things by them for their approval when we were doing this exhibition.
I thought maybe that we could talk a little bit more about specific mannequins that we worked on. So for the Lakota section, this one that I chose is a very simple mannequin, right? But I chose it for a specific reason, which is that sometimes we have to make compromises. Right? Emil, maybe you can speak more to why we chose this particular pose for this dress.
For women to be able to decorate a dress like this or to sit down and bead like this was really an accomplishment for her. So where the men may have proved themselves through war deeds, the women proved themselves through artistic abilities. And so this dress, which is what we call a heavily beaded yoke dress, we really wanted to display all the details on this dress and how much it took to really actually bead. Well, one, to get all the materials for this is a challenge, and then to sit down and to bead something this completely and with the design elements. So we really want to kind of display that. You don't see a lot of accessories on this dress. You don't see the belt. You don't see some of the other things that would have accompanied this one. But we just really wanted to illustrate this form, which really became a very typical style today of a women's traditional outfit.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was kind of an interesting challenge for this dress, because there's all the fringe and it does kind of bell out a little bit, there's a lot of volume at the bottom of the dress. And so we found that if we let it hang naturally, that it would definitely have been bumping into that piece of case furniture, which would have been not good for the dress. And so we ended up discussing and making the mannequin so it almost looks like a superwoman, when hopefully you don't see it that way as it's displayed, and it's really just kind of spreading the dress out.
Correct. But I think what I like about this, the way we set it up, is you don't see a lot of folds or wrinkles in it, just the way it's shown now, more visually appealing, even though it seems like the skirt is, very wide.
Again, so a few years later, we worked together on a really large show that was it was all about the garments.
One of the things about this exhibition, it was really the evolution of dress styles from the early what we call the two-hide dresses, made of two hides, and how once trade was introduced and they developed more with beads, cloth, and you'll see the influence of how all these trade materials kind of changed the style a bit, but still there's still some links through it all that you see that the communities. Yeah, so these are contemporary dresses that we acquired for the exhibition, and they represent Southern Plains And the dress with the heavily beaded blue is from the northern plains. And you can see the now with these southern dresses, we had more of the accessories associated with them. They have these beaded crowns, which kind of comes from the idea of these women were often elected to be princesses representing their tribal nations, representing veteran groups. And so here we had to come up, or you had to come up with some way of floating this crown and all the accessories to make it look realistic.
I remember that we had a lot of conversations about that because we essentially had two choices, right? As either we were going to have a head or we were going to have the idea of the head. I wanted to talk specifically about the Jane Myers dress. As a mannequin maker, it was, this kind of thing is a little bit intimidating when the artist and the person who danced the dress would be visiting the exhibit. And so on one hand, that's that adds to the challenge, and you always want to do it right, but it's like you really want to do it right. But then also it gave a kind of a wonderful opportunity too, because you supplied me with these pictures and then there were videos I could look at to see where everything was supposed to hang in just the right places for the beadwork. Because often, you might have the measurements of somebody, but it's still just might not look right until it's like, oh, that needs to go there and that needs to happen there.
Yeah, no, we were very fortunate to be able to have images of these ladies wearing various regalia and how they hung. The leggings you'll see there, the blue leggings and moccasins, that's part of the Joyce Growing Thunder dress that you just saw, the blue dress. And, we did consult with them too and how they should sit, the leggings, the moccasins, things like that.
And I brought up these slides because when you were just talking about the getting the feet just right and getting everything placed right, those kinds of needs forced us to think about new ways of approaching the mannequins too. So we came up with this idea of the gartered leg that's attached to the torso, but it's a little bit flexible and the feet are weighted as much as it's safe to weight them so that we can move them into a position on site and have some flexibility there, depending on how the light's hitting it, depending on how what just looks right for the situation. So that's been a nice addition to our mannequin toolbox. And then the hair ties were that was a kind of a fun challenge too, because we had decided not to have hair, but there were hair ties. So we eventually came up with this idea that I think you can see a little bit of it here from the back. We used a kind of a foam baccarad and wrapped that in fleece. And then Emil took the shoelaces and did the tying on. And then that whole ensemble just kind of goes around the neck. And then you can see that it just comes around the front of her shoulders there. And then the hair ties hang as though they were.
You can see it with Jane in her photo there, where you see the red ties that are wrapped around her braids. And that was kind of the illusion we were going for with the mannequin, was to make it look like these braids were coming out. And,
so at least it wouldn't be distracting too. That was part of the balance that we, if we couldn't go for full reality, then at least let it not be like, well, why is that even there? So that's also part of that compromise. So last but not least, this is a show called Circle of Dance, which the entire show was curated by our colleague Cecile Gantome. But you and I worked together a lot on this mannequin.
This is a Northern traditional beaded outfit by a man named Robert Tiger, Boy Tiger. He beaded this outfit. The challenge was putting it into a very small space and trying to get movement out of it.
Yeah, well, the entire reason for this exhibit to be was dance, right? It was to represent in each of those cases a specific dance in a specific pose from a specific place. And the cases were existing cases and we were fitting into those cases. But we did want realism in the pose so that even if there wasn't actual movement happening, that people could connect the pose that was chosen to the video that they're seeing and recognize, oh, that's that one. I see. I see how that one. And so there was a lot of conversations in from all the different tribes and groups that on what's the pose that's representative of this dance, and it's not an easy thing to do. So for me, thankfully for this case, you gave me a double bonus, which was a picture of Robert Tiger in the actual regalia and a picture of someone. Who's the gentleman who's dancing?
His name's Terry Fiddler.
Terry
And
Fiddler.
he's from South Dakota, and he's a champion Northern traditional dancer. And you can see by the pose he's
the model, for this pose. You can't get better than that for having something to work with. And you can see, I just wanted to show in the mannequin before it's dressed that we do build all our mannequins from the ground up essentially. We work with foam and metal and various things to create the forms. But for these, he was his ensemble is super heavy. That vest alone is feels like 20 pounds.
The belt, yeah, it's heavily beaded. He made it himself, and so we just really wanted to highlight that, and I think he did a good job.
Oh, well, thank you. But because of the weight of it, it's like, the arms had to be reinforced in a slightly different way than we usually do. You can see that the back structure, the shoulders are they're more of a shelf. They have to be more of a shelf to carry all that weight. And then you see the torso that's cut in several pieces to allow us to twist the body to add a little bit more animation as we needed to. And the other thing that was both a challenge and a fun problem to solve for this one was that there would be hands and feet sometimes and faces visible, and we wanted, in a similar way to how it was approached in our universes, we didn't want full-on portraiture, but we wanted each dancer in each of the cases to look like a little bit like they would. So I used a variety of materials to sort of make the dancer to take on some of the features of Robert Tiger, just very generally, like the brow line and a little bit of the cheekbones and a little bit of the nose, and just to have a kind of a look. And then our designers decided for color-wise on this medium gray that would fade into the background of the case, but would still read as identifiable, body parts, but it's clearly not the color that the skin would be. And then we worked with false shape to make hands and faces that could, as you can see, for example, with the fan here, there's a mount that holds, this was in process, so it's not quite a finished mount, but there's a mount that holds the fan in place, and it has a variety of set screws and things that allow us to twist it and turn it how we need it to go. And then we could put the hand over that and cut the false shape so that it's not actually rubbing against the object, and then put everything into place, and it would give the look of the hand holding it. Then that also leads into our other compromise, that normally in these ensembles he'd be wearing a bustle, right?
Yeah, he'd be wearing a feathered bustle, but to have him featured not wearing something would just kind of look out of place. So the compromise was these two spikes with these plumes on the end would have been part of the dance bustle, and then there would have been like a whole feathered thing that would come around the back. So we didn't feature that part, but it looks, you see the illusion that there is a bustle back there just by seeing those plumes that are sticking up from the back.
Mm-hmm. And so it brings us circle back around to fitting in the case again.
Yeah, right.
Because if he were actually leaning over like he is, the way these cases are, the glass kind of slopes back, and so it gets a little shallower the higher you go in the case. And so we needed to make some compromises there. But it does look like, if you look at it from the front here, it does look like his bustle, So, we hope that for these examples, we've introduced you to some of the challenges and the decisions that we've looked at over the years and continue to look at. It's a ever evolving, continuing conversation that we have, with some of the same challenges coming up over and over again, but each one pushing us to try to do it a little bit better each time. And hopefully we have, and we'll continue this conversation in the future. Thank you, Emil, so much for
Okay,
being
well,
here.
thank you. Thank you for taking me back this far down memory lane.
What material is the gray mount of the Circle of Life, and what is the gray finish made with?
So that is Foshape. The all the hands and the faces and the feet, anything that was exposed in that exhibit, in the Circle of Dance exhibit, were covered with Foshape essentially. And the way that I got those sculptural, the way I created the molds were in a variety of ways. So for the heads, I had some, extra foam around, and then I used this material called Sculpt-A-Mold. That's just like a cellulose, like you use in kindergarten, to make, you put water in it and you stick it on things. And that doesn't stay in the case. That I just kind of used to build up on top of the foam to create cheekbones and brow lines and noses and things, and then let that all dry. And then I use that to wrap the Foshape around. And so what's going on, and then the Foshape, after that's steamed, then that holds its shape. And then we painted it with gray latex, low VOC latex paint that had been approved, which really changed the texture of the Foshape and made it starts out a little bit rough, but it made it very rough. So anywhere that there's an overlap with the garment, there's a good layer of padding between the two, felt or whatever. So that's how the heads were done. And then the hands we kind of whittled down the number of poses with hands that we needed. So there were quite a few men holding things in their right hand. so we got a bunch of people together and did like a hand, a bunch of little just hand molds, where we kind of had a party where I invited a bunch of people in the conservation and collections departments, and all the men that I could get in for the male poses, and just had people do those poses. And then we used those casts and wrapped the Foshape around it. And then, you take off the Foshape and you essentially have a skin that you can use you can cut around and wrap around any of the real support that's going on underneath. So there are mounts holding up the headdresses and things like that are separate. And then the skins kind of wrap around.
That is so cool. And while I have you here, and maybe Emil can chime in too, Karen has said, I see all these beaded dance ensembles are relatively contemporary, worn by modern people. Do you have and work with any older collections made in the past, and have those survived?
Emil, do you?
I know. I was just thinking of identity by design. We still used older materials. I mean, older dresses for that. It wasn't just a contemporary. It was just, I think the oldest one we had was the side fold dress that had, was like early 1800s, in which we had to build a mount for that. That was just virtually, the dress had to be laid flat, and that's how it was stored later. But I don't know, do you want to add something?
Well, I think that you really hit on something there, because I think that depending on the fragility of the garment, no matter what age it is, that does restrict what we can do with it. And so for all the garments that were in the Circle of Dance exhibit, for example, because those were so animated, or with the dresses in the contemporary dance section of Identity by Design, we knew that there was more, of course, we consulted with our conservation department to see what the dresses could actually do. And so for many of the older dresses, we definitely could not, kind of wrap them around and do all kinds of things, that we might be more restricted in what the beads can take, or, any of the limitations there.
Well, I remember if you remember, one of the little girls' dresses, a small one that's fully bead at the top, the skirt, everything. And that one, we used it in this exhibition, and I think it was selected we thought about sending it for another exhibition, but we found after it was in storage, that a lot of the beads were falling off it. So we restricted the traveling of that dress because it's so fragile and the beads were falling off. But it's a beautiful dress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we definitely mount older garments, but just maybe not in the exact same way.
And we have a question that is, where did it go? This is from social media. With all the different, more animated poses, how does that impact the costume? Can it create folds or creases? Can it create stress on the fabric?
Is this still Shelly and I, or?
I think this is open to anyone.
Oh, okay. All right.
You're here, so you should answer.
Well, I think for us, I mean, I think the ones that really did, and Shelly probably hit this earlier, was that the more contemporary ones have the ones that have the more shape and the more movement to it, and things that newly required. I think the historic ones, we really were careful about those and how they were displayed and mounted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure that's something that everybody who makes mannequins has to think about. You know, it is, well, for light reasons and for, you know, obviously creasing the fabric and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's definitely something that you think about for sure, and that you consult with your conservators and figure out what can be done, what should be done.
Right.